The night Bruce Lee walked in alone. When you watch Bruce Lee move, you already sense something is different about him. But nothing in those clips could fully prepare you for what happened on one cold November night in Oakland. Stay with this story until the end, because what those 230 people witnessed in that warehouse changed something inside every single one of them permanently. Bruce Lee weighed 141 pounds. He walked into that Oakland warehouse completely alone. No coach, no training partner, no one watching his back. Inside, 230 people were already waiting. Most of them had shown up expecting to see a man get taken apart. What they actually saw over the next 11 minutes was something none of them could ever fully explain, and none of them ever forgot. This is what happened. Oakland, California, November 1969. Not the scenic Oakland you see in travel photos. This was a different side of the city entirely, the side that came alive after midnight in unmarked warehouses, in rooms where men gathered to watch other men find out exactly how much punishment a human body could take before something inside it broke for good. The air that night was the kind of cold the Bay Area does in autumn, damp and heavy, the sort that slips through your jacket without warning and settles right in the middle of your chest, exactly where fear tends to live. None of the 230 people inside had bought a ticket. There were no tickets, no promoter, no referee, no doctor standing by, no official of any kind. What brought everyone together was a single phone call made 4 days earlier. That call spread through Oakland's underground fighting community the way a fire moves through dry grass, fast, total, and unstoppable once it started. The message was short. Bruce Lee is going to fight Viktor Petrenko. That was it. No time, no address, just two names placed side by side, and the unspoken weight of what it meant when men that different from each other ended up in the same room with no way out. People came anyway. They always do when something real is on offer, something that cannot be scripted, rehearsed, or dressed up. Just the truth, delivered at full force, with nothing softened for the people watching. Viktor Petrenko was 34 years old and had never lost, not once. He had trained since the age of 9 in Eastern European wrestling halls under coaches who used pain as a teaching method. When he arrived in the United States 3 years earlier, speaking almost no English and carrying a single bag, he walked straight into the underground fighting circuit in Chicago and Detroit and began dismantling every opponent placed in front of him with a quiet, almost mechanical efficiency that left witnesses searching for words. He stood 6 feet 4 inches and weighed 311 pounds. Those numbers alone do not tell the full story, because Petrenko was not simply large. His size had a different quality to it. His hands were the size of dinner plates. His neck was broader than most men's shoulders. When he entered a room, people stepped aside without thinking about it, the way water moves around a stone. Before coming to America, he had competed as a decorated Greco-Roman wrestler at the international level. The details of why he left were never shared publicly. What was known was that he had thrown men weighing 240 pounds as though they weighed nothing. What was known was that across 31 underground matches in 4 American cities, he had knocked out, submitted, or broken every single man he faced. The fighting community had given him a nickname. They called him the Architecture, because people who had survived fighting him said it felt less like fighting a person and more like fighting a building. There was no soft spot, no opening, no way in that did not immediately lead somewhere worse. He absorbed hits that would have finished other men and responded not with fury, but with something far more unsettling: patience. The patience of something that has simply never been tested hard enough to feel urgency. By every measure available, Viktor Petrenko was the most dangerous man in any room he entered. Until the night Bruce Lee was in that room too. Bruce arrived at the warehouse at 9:47 in the evening. He came alone, No team, no manager, no one alongside him. He was wearing dark trousers and a plain gray jacket, which he removed and folded neatly over the back of a wooden chair near the entrance. Underneath was a simple black training top, nothing decorative, nothing for show, the clothing of a man who came to work. He stood 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 141 pounds. The difference in weight between him and Petrenko was 170 pounds. That number is almost too large to seem real. It reads like the setup to a joke, or the kind of detail a storyteller invents to make a story more dramatic. Except 230 people were present, and they spent the rest of their lives telling anyone willing to listen exactly what happened next. Bruce moved through the warehouse without acknowledging the crowd. He found an open area near the far wall, stood still for about 4 minutes, eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately, as though each breath was a choice he was making rather than something his body was doing on its own. People nearby watched him, not quite sure what they were seeing. It did not look like any kind of warm-up. It did not look like meditation in any form they recognized. One witness later described it simply. He said it looked like a man having a very quiet conversation with himself about something he had already made his mind about. When Bruce opened his eyes, they found Petrenko immediately, straight across the warehouse, through the crowd, without a single moment of searching. Petrenko had been watching him since he walked in. The giant's face gave nothing away, not mockery, not amusement, not any particular interest. It was the expression of a man who expected to have a full understanding of the situation within the next half hour. For 3 seconds, neither man moved. Then Bruce nodded, once, small and precise. Petrenko said nothing, but the men standing closest to him noticed a subtle shift behind his eyes. Not fear, not quite, but perhaps the earliest trace of a question that had never occurred to him before that moment. What does this man know that I do not? Once that question arrived, it did not leave. The story of how these two men ended up in the same warehouse on the same November night begins, as most significant things do, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a conversation nobody was supposed to hear.
When the physics of skill meet the physics of size. Speed has limits, technique has limits, and when the gap in body mass between two fighters crosses a certain point, the laws of physics begin to override the laws of skill. A 240-pound man throwing everything he has at a 140-pound man is not a technique problem, it is a structural problem, the kind of problem that ends careers and sometimes ends more than that. Bruce understood this completely, better than anyone else in that gymnasium, in fact, because he had spent his entire adult life studying exactly that question, not running from it, not brushing it aside, but examining it with the discipline of a scientist and the focus of a man for whom the question was never theoretical, it was personal, it was existential. What does the small man do when the large man commits everything? He had an answer. He had tested it, sharpened it, and proven it in closed rooms against men who were serious, large, trained, and entirely unimpressed by anyone's reputation. He believed in that answer the way a mathematician believes in a proven equation, not with the fragile hope that it might hold up, but with the solid confidence of someone who has watched it work repeatedly under real conditions. But Viktor Petrenko was not simply a large man. Viktor Petrenko was a category all by himself. For exactly 4 seconds, his students counted it later when comparing their memories, Bruce Lee stood completely still and looked at nothing in particular. He was somewhere else entirely, running calculations that no one in that room could follow. Then he came back. "Tell Mr. Petrenko," he said quietly, "that I will answer his question. 4 days. He picks the location." Caruso smiled. The man standing in the doorway said nothing, but something in his expression had changed from the one he had walked in with. Something in his assessment had shifted. He had come expecting hesitation. He had expected conditions, back-and-forth negotiations, the careful stalling of a man buying himself time to think. He had not expected 4 seconds at a yes. Over the next 4 days, word moved through the Bay Area underground like an electric current. By the following morning, the core of the fighting community already knew. By that afternoon, the story had reached people with no direct connection to either man, people who nonetheless understood immediately what this matchup represented. By the 3rd day, the location had been settled, a warehouse in Oakland, chosen by Petrenko's people. A space they knew, a space they controlled, a space where Petrenko had fought twice before. Both times, his opponent had not been standing when the night ended. People began making their way to Oakland from San Jose, from Sacramento, from across the bay. They came because they had heard. They came because something in the description of what was about to happen triggered a response that ran deeper than reason. The deep human pull toward witnessing something at the very edge of what is possible, where the question of what a person can actually do stops being a topic of conversation and becomes, for a few undeniable minutes, simply and irrevocably real. 230 people packed into that warehouse, and every single one of them, when they described that night afterward, started the same way. They said, "You have to understand. You have to understand what it looked like when both of them were in the same room." The warehouse had no name. It sat on a street that industrial maps recorded with a number rather than a word, in a part of Oakland that the city's own promotional material pretended did not exist. Surrounded by other buildings of similar anonymity, structures that stored things, processed things, conducted the quiet, invisible commerce of a port city without any interest in being noticed. During the day, it was unremarkable. At night, with 230 people crowded inside and a single suspended lamp throwing a hard circle of yellow light down onto the concrete floor, it became something else entirely. It became the kind of place where something was about to happen that could not be undone once it had. The crowd had organized itself without any instruction. People stood in a rough circle around the lit area, pressed close at the edges. Those in the back had climbed up on crates and old machinery to see over the heads of the people in front of them. The air was heavy with body heat, cigarette smoke, and that particular atmospheric pressure that builds in an enclosed space when a large number of people are all holding the same state of anticipation at the same time. Nobody was speaking loudly. That was the first detail nearly every witness mentioned afterward. At any other kind of event, a boxing venue, a wrestling hall, a sanctioned fight of any sort, there would have been noise, shouting, the competitive energy of a crowd working itself into a fever. But here, 230 people were almost silent, because by now they had all seen both men in the room, and the seeing had done something to the noise. Petrenko stood at the far end of the lit space. He had arrived 30 minutes before Bruce and spent that time doing very little, standing, occasionally rolling his shoulders, once accepting a cup of water from someone near the wall and drinking it without any sign of hurry. He wore a sleeveless gray training shirt and dark wrestling trousers, no shoes. His bare feet on the cold concrete floor were wide and flat, and somehow communicated all on their own the impression of something foundational, something built to bear enormous weight. Men who had spent their entire lives in combat sports and who were not easily impressed found themselves standing a few feet further from him than they normally would have stood from another man. One witness, a judo instructor from San Francisco, who had competed at international level and was not known for exaggeration, described it years later this way. He said, "I have been in rooms with dangerous men my whole adult life. I know what danger feels like as a physical presence. Petrenko was beyond that category. Standing near him felt like standing near a large piece of industrial machinery that was currently switched off but could become active at any moment. The danger was not in anything he was doing, it was simply in what he was. He had not looked toward the entrance since Bruce arrived. He did not need to. He knew exactly where Bruce was. Every small shift in the crowd's energy, every subtle change in the atmosphere of the warehouse had tracked Bruce's movement through the space with the accuracy of a compass finding north. Petrenko absorbed all of this without appearing to absorb any of it, the way a deeply experienced predator monitors an entire environment continuously and automatically without spending a single unit of conscious attention on it. When Danny Caruso stepped into the center of the lit space and raised a hand for quiet, Petrenko turned and looked directly at Bruce. 40 feet separated them. The crowd between them seemed in that moment to become almost transparent. The geometry of the entire warehouse reorganized itself around 2 points. Everything else, the 228 other people, the smoke, the cold air, the yellow light, became background, the frame around the only thing that actually mattered. Bruce did not look away. He stood with his weight slightly forward, hands loose at his sides, his body carrying the particular stillness that his own students recognized immediately, but that strangers almost always misread. They saw a relaxed man. They saw a small man standing quietly in a warehouse. Some of them saw something that looked like calm. It was not calm. It was the opposite of calm, compressed tightly into a shape that calm sometimes resembles from the outside. It was total activation, every sense, every system, every carefully built understanding of the situation running at full capacity simultaneously, producing an exterior stillness the way a gyroscope produces stability, not through the absence of force, but through the precise and total management of it. In that moment, Bruce Lee was more completely awake than he had ever been in his life, and Viktor Petrenko, standing 40 feet away across that concrete floor, understood this. The question behind his eyes shifted, sharpened. Yes, the question said now, this one is different. Caruso spoke for approximately 90 seconds. He outlined what everyone already knew, and the warehouse held its breath. The 11 minutes nobody ever forgot. Caruso finished and stepped back. What he had established was simple. This was a private event. No recordings, no official result, no existence outside these walls. Whatever happened in this warehouse would stay in this warehouse. The men who witnessed it would carry it quietly, share it carefully, and understand that its value depended entirely on it remaining unknown to people who had not earned the right to know it. Then the warehouse went silent. Not the silence of a crowd settling down, a deeper silence than that. People described it afterward as being able to hear the building itself, the metal structure ticking in the November cold, the distant sound of water out on the bay, the collective breath of 230 people who all, in the same instant, had forgotten to breathe normally. Petrenko moved first, not toward Bruce,